You know, when I was captured by the Big Brother, the interrogators at Room 101 were trying to get me to give up my friends as terrorists and enemies of the state. At first, I refused, but then they did something so vile, so corrupting and painful that it only took me 15 seconds to give not only my friends, but my entire bloodline to the state. They forced me to watch Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss at the same time. This was such a revolting experience that I wished for the sweet release that was an execution. After dying, I was sent to the first layer of hell. Or so I thought. In reality, my mind, in my final moments, had conjured up all the problems with that sight I had been forced to observe. And so I must, like another Dante, descend into the madness and face Unspoken. Unspoken my ass. This series has been out for almost a year and has been torn to shreds, evils, while beings are assaulted from every direction by the spawns of Lucifer. Here is why Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss, henceforth known as HH and HB respectively, is worse than garbage. Number 1. The dialogue. Perhaps the most noticeable and memed issue. Half the dialogue consists of the most milquetoast slurs for the sake of being edgy. However, this is the better half of the dialogue. The other half is the most unrealistic, overexpository and mechanical, in the sense that only the writer could construct such a sentence and not the characters, string of words ever created. In essence, the dialogue doesn't come from the character, it comes from the writer, which you should try to avoid. Number 2. Exposition. In traditional and modern writing, it is common practice to use exposition in the first third of the story, generally to explain the protagonist's ghost, the backstory that matters, such as trauma and regrets, the setting, and the protagonist's desire. Bad writers will do the dreaded exposition dump, where they throw in all information at the beginning before they even have the audience attention and interest. Good writers will spread the exposition across the first third, and great writers will use dialogue instead of narration to expose information. Of course, there are cases where a narration makes more sense. HH and HB commits the cardinal sin of repeated exposition dumps, where they will clumsily share information the audience already knows, such as Charlie's daddy issues, which I will get to. Essentially, the exposition distracts and bores the audience. Instead, use dialogues, and for the love of God, don't repeat already given information unless you have actually changed something about it. Number 3. The Story World. Now, considering that the show takes place in Hell, one of the most explored supernatural realms in all of fiction, Dante's Inferno is famous for it, you would think that Vivzipop would have an easy time creating a logically sound and interesting world. However, she fails at both. 3a. The rules. When you create a new world, you have to create a set of rules which all entities within shared world must abide by. Usually, these rules take the form of laws of physics, hard rules which cannot be overridden without great cost. Here are the rules of Hell in the Christian sense. 1. Hell is the domain of Satan, making him its absolute ruler. 2. Hell is the endpoint of the sinner, who has separated himself from God via sinful action. 3. Hell is eternal punishment for the sinner. The problem with HH and HB's rendition of Hell is that it has no real rules in and of itself. Any rule that is introduced is subverted, such as Hell is punishment, expressed symbolically through the name, being subverted by Hell being a cool and edgy place. This overall causes the world to lose its believability, since the audience does not know what is possible and what is not, what makes sense and what doesn't. In short, make sure your world is believable to the audience and that it abides by its own set of rules. 3b. The Disinterest. Hell in HH and HB is practically Chicago with a red filter and more neon signs. We have seen such violence-filled worlds everyone: Gotham, New York in Monster Noir stories, Chicago in Watch Dogs, Stillwater from SR1 and 2, and that means that the writers have to do something unique to be interesting. Spoiler alert, they don't. What that does is minor, at least compared to other flaws down the line, but makes the audience lose interest since nothing can be really covered. Within a couple of episodes, we know effectively everything about the world that HH is set in, and that means there is nothing to chew on in that regard in later episodes. Chapter 4. The Characters. Instead of trying to analyze the characters, which would be an exercise in tedium, I will sum up all the characters that register in my complex. Charlie, daddy issues girl who sees the best in Diddy. Alastor, walking mystery box. Adam, Prick HR manager. Serpentius, the only real character. I will not show his name. Blitzo, crybaby stepdad. Stolas, the father and husband of all time. Luna, bitch. Lucifer, midlife crisis. The problem is that, for characters who are supposed to be sinners or, in the case of Adam, pricks, there are no real weaknesses. Hell, Charlie's supposed weakness, her kindness and compassion, literally saves Serpentius. It seems that the writers refuse to even treat Charlie's, and other characters' weaknesses with the required gravity. In short, the characters are two-dimensional caricatures that are not negatively affected by their supposed weakness, making them flat and uninteresting. Even worse, none of the characters, except Serpentius, and this is the reason he is the only good character, change for the better or the worse in time, something I will get to in the next section. Chapter 5. Plot, or lack thereof. With all other aspects failing so far, at least a good plot could salvage the project from Concord Tier E waste to radioactive waste. However, the plot actively implodes on itself, due to one reason, not being organic. What I mean by that is plot appears to be mechanical. The cogs of the machine that is the writer's construction are visible behind it, making the audience unimmersed. Organic plot has to come from the characters themselves. There are two problems with the plot. 1. Episodic and unchanging. Now, an episodic plot can work, many cartoons utilize it, but it works only if you do not want to change the characters and the world around them. Even plots which appear episodic, such as Dexter and Adventure Time, will feature an overarching progression, if not in the world, at the very least in the characters, because they learn from their mistakes. It doesn't matter if the lesson is correct. Obsessive drive, where a character, usually the protagonist, throws all moral reservations aside to win, is a great part of any story. The problem with HB in particular, HH has a time endpoint, the next extermination, which pretty much adequately resolves the issue, is that the episodes are so disjointed from one another that it becomes impossible to chart any meaningful change for most characters, often having to revert them to a previous state just so that they can do the same arcs, think Season 2 Luna. 2. Driven by the writer, not the characters. An even bigger problem, and one that is fatal to any script, is that there are no real plotting from the characters themselves. Now, Charlie's inability to do pretty much anything is important to the story, so we can let it slide. However, for such cases we have the writer's favorite person, the antagonist. And here's the problem. Adam does nothing for most of the story. The only thing he does before the battle is berate Charlie, and not even in an interesting way. Refer to Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs for great vocal attacks aimed at the protagonist. The question that the audience has is, what is Adam doing all this time? Because he isn't preparing for the final battle, he got his ass one-shot by Charlie, he isn't spying on Child's efforts, or sabotaging them. In short, Adam is the worst kind of an antagonist, a complete passive one. The only plotting he does, the reveal that Vaggie is a fallen angel, which is seen a mile away, is inhibited by the fact that not only does it not attack Charlie's weakness, it actively nurtures it. You have to try to screw your antagonist badly. He has no plotting, no motivation, except being an ass, no end goal, no justifications, except again being an ass, nothing. He's a walking speaker. In more miscellaneous fashion, there is the issue of pacing, but I don't care enough to explain it fast. Just know that a bunch of nothing happens for an hour, then everything happens in 5 minutes. In short, the plot is almost unsalvageable in its current state. Nothing short of a rewrite could save it. Now, we are about to enter levels of depravity that, even if a billion webtoon creators were given infinite resources and time travel to recreate Lolita, even they could not come up with anything approaching the anti-ultimate of moral messages in regards to sheer corruption of mind and soul alike. Number 6. The anti-moral. Now, combining all the above factors would give us a garbage show. But what makes it worse than garbage is its message, or rather, lack thereof. Considering that the show is set in hell, you would think that there would be a message in there about, I don't know, sin and redemption. And although the story appears to have one, it actually doesn't. Why? Because simply put, the fundamental problem with not having rules about how sinners are redeemed is that no one can be right, and by extension, wrong. And the nature of a moral vision and a message is that there is a categorical answer to a moral question. If no one knows how sinners are redeemed, who's to say Adam is wrong? For all we know, sinners can be redeemed, which is actually the case in the Christian version of hell. Thus, the story is void of a message, because it fundamentally refuses to show the answers to its own question. Can sinners be redeemed, and if so, how? In the end, HH fails at his redemption story because no one knows or understands how to redeem a sinner, or if it's even possible. It would be like debating the ethics of genetic modification with a Roman. However, things would be alright if that was the only problem with the moral message. The bigger issue is that the writers have the goal to pretend, from the very beginning, that Charlie is morally correct in every single one of her decisions, even when she makes deals with Alastor. Even worse, when she is trying to subvert heaven, which, mind you, is pretty much the only thing holding sinners back from the real world, she is shown as the hero, and we even get a Disney-esque song about redemption. The song was so bland, I could swear the lyrics was generated by ChatGPT, but I digress. But she isn't subverting heaven. She's exposing the hypocrisy of Adam and Sarah. It is shown is, if hell is forever, then heaven is a line, someone might say. Here is a problem. Pretty much no one in hell has ever tried to change for the better. If we are to believe, and the show implies that, because no one has ever been redeemed in centuries, that Charlie is the only reason Angel and Serpens change for the better. Why wouldn't heaven be afraid of an uprising of the biggest scums to ever exist, who all have decided to say the same words, become more evil as time goes on? It is very telling that no one has ever been redeemed by their own. But that only means that they need a support network. Does someone need to go to AA to stop being an alcoholic? Sure, it's way easier, but people have been able to stop their vices before real support networks existed. Are we really supposed to believe that? No one in the history of hell has ever managed to redeem themselves through their own actions. And that this is the anti-moral of HH. It presents heaven and the extermination as morally reprehensible, but when we consider what exactly the residents of hell are going to do if they rise up against heaven, it's no wonder Adam resorted to the exterminations. In fact, some may argue that's not enough, since in the finale, Adam gets obliterated, meaning that hell really is stronger than heaven and they could overtake heaven if they wanted to. In the end, that is the message that HH wants to push, that sinners are misunderstood, that killing objectively bad people who have time and time again proven they are objectively bad is immoral, and if only heaven did not exist, then they would be good and moral and whatnot. It completely ignores what the sinners are, or the reason someone ends up in hell. Chapter 7. The desecration of the Christian story, Genesis, and the entire concept of heaven and hell. When you take an established story, especially one that has great moral meaning, and you decide to adapt it to your own story, you must make sure that you understand the reason for existing. Now, the story of Genesis, or the story of creation of the world in the original sin, is about God creating everything within the world, including Adam and Eve. Even then Adam committed the original sin of trusting the devil and eating the forbidden fruit. It is worth noting that the original sin is effectively the direct result of hubris or pride, due to Adam and Eve trying to reach the levels of God, a common pattern in the Old Testament. As punishment, God expels them from heaven, taking away their immortality and forcing Adam and by extension all men to toil the earth for food, and Eve and by extension all women to give painful childbirth. Initially, the idea that Eve, after the events of Genesis, would abandon Adam to join Lucifer in hell can make sense. However, there are two big problems with this idea. 1. If Eve left Adam after the events of Genesis, how was humanity created in the story of HH? 2. And most importantly, it destroys the most fragile of hope that is insinuated at the end of Genesis. In the original story, it is implied that God, for all the punishment he served to the first humans, is still watching over them, and that humans still have a chance to embrace God. This becomes evident far later in the story of the crucifixion, where Jesus sacrifices himself to absolve all sin, especially the original sin, allowing humanity to fully embrace God once again. It is also important to note the transformation of God from a vengeful father to a forgiving father, a common mark in the creation of a higher moral system. The issue alone is not enough to claim that the story has been twisted. It could have been a simple narrative oversight, and we all know how common these are. The much bigger issue is the mischaracterization of heaven and hell, or the afterlife. The most clear-cut definition of heaven and hell that is given is communion with God and rejection of God, respectively. In essence, the sinner rejects the overwhelming benevolence that God represents, so he is unable to see him, leading to eternal suffering, at least up until the second coming, which isn't coming any day, so I saw it in a dream. We can also deduce that heaven must mean embracing God's benevolence, meaning a good and moral life. It is important to note that this does not mean without sin, as no man is without sin. It means being able to atone for said sin. The problem now is twofold. On one hand, hell does not constitute punishment. Sinners are pretty much free to do as they please, and they are also given immortality, which is kind of antithetical to the whole punishment thing. On the other hand, and that is the most damning evidence that the Christian stories have been deliberately twisted. Heaven is not a reward for a moral life. Coming back to the if hell is forever, then heaven is a lie line, it reconstructs the idea of what heaven is to such a degree that I may only attribute to sheer incompetence and stupidity, or worse, malice. Of course, I won't say that Vivzipop and the other creatives behind the show are malicious. There is literally no evidence of that. I don't think that this point requires you to be a Christian to understand it. The thing is, the Christian story is, like most religious stories, a story about the moral framework a society should follow. What Vivzipop has, I hope unwittingly done, is thrown an entire ideology for no good reason. Not like there was ever a good reason to strawman your opposition, but whatever. And as such, we reached the end of the 7 circles of hell that were my criticism of HH and HB. I had originally planned to talk about the fandom, but they're infamous enough, and Vivzipop as a creative, but there are far better documentations of her behavior out there, but neither of those are relevant to the artistic work at hand. To not be completely negative, I must say, the animation and songs are great, and the acting is superb. In better times, these people would be working on the Disney Renaissance, or The Producer, or Breaking Bad, or SpongeBob, the original one obviously, or Schindler's List, or Casablanca. But they found themselves here, and they conducted themselves with such professionalism we can only hope to emulate. I'll be honest, I've seen many critiques of HH and HB, and although many of them are great works, I've always had the feeling they were just scratching the surface. It has been bugging me for almost a year, and I've only found the true answer now. Vivzipop sold her soul to the machine, and her mind to a certain bluebird, and in hindsight it was obvious. But I'll leave that up to you. Think of it as hope. I trust your intelligence after all.